I know many people who want to build a startup. But before you build one, you need to understand some fundamental concepts. What makes a startup work? Is it the founder, the idea, the timing, the market, or something else entirely? Today's guest has wrestled with these questions from various different angles. Joyce Tay is a partner at Startup X, and she works with founders, and she also works with governments and large companies to design innovation programs and create startup ecosystems. In this episode, we dive into what a startup is, whether entrepreneurship can really be taught, why Asia's innovation model should be different from the West, and what separates those founders who succeed from the ones that don't. Here's my episode with Joyce Tay. So, Joyce, I wanted to hear your thoughts on the difference between businesses and a startup, because I think people often mix those two terms.
So when we think about businesses, we think about traditional businesses. And so it could be like a bubble tea shop. It could be like a convenience store. So these are very traditional. It could be mom and pop businesses. It could be, also larger enterprises. But typically, the big challenge is that they're not scalable, and technology is not necessarily a core part of the business. But when we look at startups, those are two of the very big levers, right? So it must be a tech company. Tech must be a core part of the product. So it's either tech or tech enabled. And the second thing is the technology enables the startup to be a lot more scalable. So they're able to achieve and do so much more and impact so much more with the tech layer. And I think that's a very key part. Of course, there are also, people that will talk about how startups also take investment funding in order to grow rapidly. A lot of that has changed now, so the startup environment is very different. So for me, two key things is that it must be a tech company, and it must and the technology must enable the company to scale, very sustainably.
I have a follow-up question on that for AI, but I think we'll park that for a second.
Mhm.
You design these innovation programs where you try and cultivate the spirit of people creating startups. Can you take us into that? What does it mean to actually design an innovation program? What does it involve?
It involves so much things. So we are right in the middle, right, of the ecosystem. So we have all these different stakeholders that we work with. So when we design a program, there could be a few different stakeholders. The government agencies that we work with could be a stakeholder. The larger enterprises and corporates that we work with could be a stakeholder. In fact, they could be the entity backing the program. We have the startups, and they are the participants usually of the program. You might have the investors involved. You might have other type of partners involved. So typically, when you look at all the different stakeholders, a very key part is to consider the each of the stakeholders and what they actually want to be able to achieve. And so, the very first thing is we spend time with our stakeholders to try and understand what is it that they're trying to achieve, what are the outcomes that they want to get to, what is potentially the challenge or the problem that they're trying to solve, and how do we get the startups in to be a part of that. And so that's how we decide, okay, what sort of a program really makes sense. I don't think there's ever been a time where we run a program that's a copycat of another program, because in so many of these, also depending on the geography of the region that we're running it in. Are we running it in Southeast Asia? Are we running the program in China? Or which part of the world are we running it in? What kind of startups are we aiming to work with? And then a lot of it goes into how should the program be designed? Should it be 3 months long, 6 months long? Is there a need to put in, for example, mentors into the program? Is there a need to put in, content education classes into the program? What really is going to be beneficial for all these different stakeholders at the end of the day when we look at building that program? So that's typically, I think, really just a tip of the iceberg in terms of what goes into how we design an innovation program where, all the different stakeholders involved actually get something out of it. And for us, it's very important that, because there's so many programs, all around the world that's targeted at the startups. For us, it's very important that when the startup enters the program, it's not just another additional thing that they can put on the website. but is that they really walk away from the program at the end of the day, with something tangible, whether it's in the form of connections, whether it's in the form of being able to get from point A to point B. Maybe it's a business opportunity, maybe it's fundraising, whatever it is. The program objectives have to be very clearly defined, and also at the same time, we need to make sure that all the different stakeholders get what they want to achieve out of the program that we are running as well.
Let's assume it's a country, for example. Let's say some government has called you to create a program for encouraging entrepreneurship within that country. What are some of the objectives they might have, a government specifically?
Mhm. Often it's we call it ecosystem development. So they're trying to develop the ecosystem in some way. Um, we've worked with, for example, more emerging markets, more emerging ecosystems where they're trying to build a startup ecosystem. So the ecosystem is very early. Maybe a lot of the students, the talent, people, they don't really think about building a startup yet, and the government is trying to encourage that momentum to begin. There are also times where they're more, I think, established ecosystems where they're trying to develop and basically build in a certain area, maybe cybersecurity, or maybe it's in right now, the AI space, or maybe it's in the quantum computing space. And they're trying to build up capabilities in that area. They're trying to get people interested in building more startups in that particular space. So it really depends at the end of the day, what is the outcomes again that they want to achieve? And then how can we come in and propose activities to build up that ecosystem? So it could, until I think there's a really good book on ecosystem building, I think by the founders of Techstars, when they talk about all the different elements required, right, to really build a strong community, build strong ecosystems. And so when we've gone through many sessions like that with our government partners, where we're really trying to figure out, what do you want to build, right? What are the natural resources that this particular country or ecosystem have, right? How do we build on that? There's certain countries that, they come to us and they tell us, hey, we want to build in this area. But fundamentally, it doesn't make sense because you don't have the resources to support it. But you do have natural resources in other areas where you should possibly focus and build yourself in that particular area. So Singapore's not a good example because we're a city state, right? And so there's only one ecosystem. But if you look at other countries, for example, Japan, where there are many different regions, and all these different regions have different access to different kind of resources. They have different cultures, and so on and so forth. Then you really kind of have to deep dive and figure out what really makes sense for this particular region and this particular ecosystem that you're trying to support and build up, and what ultimately can we then build in that particular area. And it's not always that the government is, I would say, to put it very politically correct, they may not know what they want. Right. And so in us working with them, is that we also bring that lens to kind of provide certain insights to help them understand what would make a lot more sense when we talk about ecosystem building.
I think this revolves around this larger philosophical question of teaching entrepreneurship. I think there are two schools of thought. Some people believe that it is an instinct that is inherent in people, and some people think it's a mindset that can be cultivated. I'm leaning towards the latter, but I'm curious to know, where do you fall in the line? Obviously, you teach entrepreneurship, so you do think it can be taught. But is it something that should already be in the founder from the very beginning, like a instinct, or is it something that can be taught to a completely fresh slate?
Yeah, that's a really good question because, like you said, I teach entrepreneurship, right? So I've gone through, probably hundreds, thousands of students at this point. I'm teaching across, um, from people that are in college at the moment and thinking, hey, being in a startup looks cool. I want to learn entrepreneurship so that I can become a startup founder. I am teaching at the adult learner level where these are probably mid-career switches, and they have, 20, 30 years of experience under their belt and they're thinking, well, I want to do something. I want to build my own rather than work for someone else. Or maybe I see a very big problem that I want to solve and my current company is not doing it. So I'm teaching people from all backgrounds, right? Um, what I'm teaching really is just frameworks. I'm sharing inspiration. I'm sharing what we can learn from certain case studies that or stories, that I bring out in my classes. But it's very hard to teach mindset in some sense because I think mindset is you have it or you can cultivate it, but it's not something that I can necessarily teach you. I can show you this is how people have done it. This is how you can build, in a certain area. But I think to have hustle, to have an entrepreneurial mindset, that you either absorb it or you don't. And so I think one thing I feel is very true is that you need to have hunger. And that hunger and that drive then pushes you to think about how you can become a better entrepreneur. If you're very comfortable, and a lot of people are very comfortable and they think, I want to start a business, but they're so comfortable, they never ever find that particular drive. They never find that it's painful enough. It's very hard to then think about becoming an entrepreneur. So I can teach your frameworks. I can teach you how to build a business plan. I can teach you the lean startup. I can teach you certain frameworks and so on. And and then I can share with you all of these stories, from people that have come before, the failure stories, the successful stories. But at the end of the day, it also really boils down on every single individual, whether they are able to develop that particular mindset. So I do believe it is possible, but I do believe that there is going to be a percentage of people that will never ever develop that, no matter how much they say, I want to be an entrepreneur.
Within this sample size, so you said college students who are in college, so they haven't had any industry experience, but they perhaps have a fresh perspective versus some folks with, let's say, 2 to 5 years of experience. What are the differences that you see between these two? And the reason I'm asking this is I often wonder whether I should jump straight into building something as opposed to maybe gaining some industry knowledge before building. And I'm just trying to think through that choice.
I think in college, the biggest failure you would have come across is possibly failing your exams, or maybe not having, gone into the college that you want to. And then, of course, there are a percentage of people that might be a lot less privileged, right? And they've probably gone through a lot more hardships in life. But at that level, what I see is that people are very optimistic and they're very willing to try. And I really appreciate that. But at the same time, the challenge is they've not seen enough of the world. They've not had a large enough exposure to think about the very big problems. And so when I work with college students, often the problems that they're trying to tackle are very small. And when I say think bigger, they try to think bigger, but it's really big enough. So as compared to someone that has, quite a number of years of working experience and they've kind of been through the hoops and all that, it's not to say that they've necessarily gone through more failures also at the same time, but it's just that I think their worldview expands a lot more. Or they've gained a lot more domain expertise in a certain area, and that helps them to think a lot more deeper into the kind of problems that they can tackle. Um, and I would say I've seen very great founders come out at the college level. I've also seen really great founders, from people that have been like maybe 40 years in the oil and gas industry, and they've seen all the inefficiencies in the industry. They know that the big guys are not going to tackle it and they want to come out and do something about it, right? So I think at all levels you're able to find very good entrepreneurs. But I think there are I would say limitations no matter what stage you're at, right? So at the end of the day, I think if you're at a college level, what I'll strongly encourage is that you try, and you because the amount of opportunities available to someone at the college level is immense. There are so many organizations, foundations, companies, enterprises that's willing to offer opportunities to people at college level. So what I'll suggest at your level is join all the competitions you can find, join all the hackathons you can find. Someone says, hey, come and try and build a startup. Go ahead and build, because at your level, you should fail as much as you can, because that's the only way you can grow. The more of such opportunities and activities you partake in, the better it will be for you as compared to someone that floats through college, focus on studies, and don't take any of these opportunities and think, I'm going to build a startup when I graduate. So at your level, grab all the opportunities you can.
I couldn't agree more. I just couldn't agree more. This is gold. I feel like even, and this is a hypothesis I have, I feel college students, when they try to think through business problems, perhaps see problems through the lens of a college student, which is to say that they think that college students are the only end consumers, and so they can't
Yeah,
perhaps open their mind to the
precisely.
fact. Yeah,
Precisely. So I get a ton of like study apps. I get a ton of like, let's change our university portal. Um, the number of pitch decks that I've seen where university students want to change their university's internal portal, I can tell you I come across that like 4 or 5 times a year, right? So from across all the college teams that I'm working with, and I tell them that's not a problem you want to solve. But oftentimes their entire worldview is, hey, I'm a student. I and my peers face this set of problems as we're going through college, and it's a big problem. I do agree that college students, they form a huge, audience, but when you're looking only at that level, it's very hard to build good to find good problems to tackle. Yeah,
I also feel like you're targeting an audience that doesn't have the money, right? As a
yeah,
college student, you're on a budget.
yeah, definitely. Right. So you want to make sure that at the same time you're targeting people that is willing to pay. And oftentimes college students are not willing to pay. Yeah.
I mean, having been a college student and now going to be another one, I can certainly tell you, like, the way you manage your money is very different from, say, when you're with your family.
Yeah.
I'd be
Yeah.
very curious to know, like, governments, I see the incentive they have to create a startup culture within their respective countries. Why would a Fortune 500 company back an entrepreneurial ecosystem? Like, why would they support it? What is in it for them?
So if you look at big tech being like your Microsoft, your Meta, Google, and so on, there's reason for them to back tech companies because they want them on their ecosystem, and so many of them have their own versions of startup programs. What makes people curious is when the non-big companies, non-big tech companies actually wants to work with startups. I think there are a lot of good reasons for that. One is that in very large enterprises, they don't have the nimbleness, and so when they're thinking about developing new products, many of them possibly have an R&D team, but they move at a very slow pace as compared to a startup that's very nimble, very hungry, and in need of, really being able to get to outcomes and show results because they're trying to make sure they are fighting for another day, right? And there's a lot of good reason in being able to bring these two together to try and put something out. And I can say it's definitely not easy. I think there are people that are deadly against, corporate programs, corporate startup programs, and so on, just because of the amount of failures that we see. And I 100% acknowledge that. But at the same time, we've seen good successes as the ecosystem becomes more informed, as the larger enterprises are willing to give more opportunities, as they learn to, I think, change their internal policies in order to be able to work with startups, right? I think they do see, what the larger companies have is often they have resources, they have data, they have users, they have access to markets and so on, which is what a lot of startups want, right? And startups need to be able to learn how to work with these enterprises and be at that level. We call that commercially ready startups, right? So you're at a level where you're ready to work with a large commercial partner, and you know how to navigate, certain bureaucracies within a larger enterprise and so on, right? And if the two are able to find a common ground to work together, I find that often that can be something very magical. And it takes a lot to be able to find that common ground. And it's very important that we do the education on both sides. We need to educate the corporates on how to work with the startup. We need to educate the startups on how to work with the corporates. But when they do work together, I think they can really make very good things together. They can collaborate on R&D. They can collaborate on building, co-innovating new products. They can tap on each other's, resource and leverage and so on. There's a lot of good reasons why they are able to do that. So for Startup X, we focus a lot on being able to find POCs and pilots between the startups and the enterprises. Because if you look at Asia as a market, this is not the West, right? So it's very important that startups are able to find good customers. And for us, being able to find them POC partners and pilot partners is finding them business opportunity to go the distance. And so we have to do the work to make sure we educate the corporates on why there is a good reason to work with the startups, how it actually improves your entire innovation process, R&D process, and so on. And what are the benefits to working with a startup, right? So for us, it's doing that educational role, but we definitely believe in the benefits that, bringing these two parties together, all the great benefits it can bring.
I want to tackle Asia specifically, but before that, I'd just be curious to know what your thoughts are on the role of an entrepreneur in residence, because isn't it their job to tackle some of these issues?
If you're an entrepreneur in residence, you're often trying to, and I'm assuming you're saying in the context that a larger enterprise has hired, kind of like a founder. And I've been that in a previous in a past life, right? There's a lot of challenges around that because when you are in residence, you are also subjected to certain bureaucracies. You are trying to work within a constrained environment. Sometimes your hands are tied. It's not that you can't do what you've been brought in to do. You can, but when I was playing that role, um, it was a very new concept in the company that I was in, and we were often taken as the IT team, where we're supposed to repair laptops, solve your internet issues. Why is my laptop not working today? I can't access my laptop. I forgot my password. How do we resolve it? So we're often mistaken as the IT team because the concept is so foreign to the general audience within the company, right? And this was almost 10 years ago. And of course, today I think companies are a lot more aware of what entrepreneurs and residents do. I think they have access to resources, they have access to data, they have access to the right people. That is definitely workable, but they are trying to work within the constraints of the enterprise. Whereas often, if the enterprise is trying to work with a startup, the startup has already come with their own version of a solution. And that's different ways of trying to figure out how to do innovation. One is trying to build it from scratch within the enterprise level, and the other one is that you see some startup out there that has a version or semblance of what you think can solve the problem, and you're trying to work with them to do that. So I'll say they're very different models, but they're both workable models.
When I was preparing for this, I saw that you made this very interesting statement. You said that Asia, and we're talking about Asia now, shouldn't copy Silicon Valley. Now, when you think of entrepreneurship, Silicon Valley is obviously the first place, the hotbed of entrepreneurship. At least it used to be. What would you? Why shouldn't Asia copy the Silicon Valley model?
Yeah, we're so fragmented. we First thing is language, right? Language, culture, that's very different. It doesn't matter where you go in US, you still speak English. And you can say that I wouldn't say that purchasing behavior is homogeneous across the whole of US, right? There's probably still quite a bit of variance, but if you look at Asia, we are melting pot of culture. So you have people from such diverse cultures. We have different languages, different regulations, different currencies, different consumer behaviors, different kind of infrastructure, different kind of digital adoption. Even there are ecosystems here that are mobile first, right? There are ecosystems that are not mobile first, right, and so on. So you are trying to navigate through as a startup based in Asia. all that amount of layers. If you're in Silicon Valley, you don't go through all of these things, right? So it's very important. I think a lot of people think, hey, just plug and play what works in the US or in Silicon Valley here, and then we should be able to create unicorns. It doesn't work that way because a very large part also is that the ecosystem in Asia is still very nascent, right? We're still considered a baby compared to Silicon Valley. And when you think about Indonesia versus India versus Singapore versus Thailand, all our ecosystems are at very different stages, right? So as a startup, you're trying to, if you're trying to expand into different ecosystems, you are refiguring out what sort of ecosystem you're going to, what sort of regulations you need to adapt to, right? What sort of consumer behavior you need to localize to, and so on. So when you think about Asia as a model, it's not one model, it's that there are multiple models that you have to consider.
Would you say that these Asian countries are also a little more constrained for resources? Not only just money, but just in general?
I think Asians tend to be a little bit more risk averse. And so there is often a sense that, hey, we don't want to be a first mover. We want to be a second mover. We want to see someone do it, been successful at it, and then we want to be the next one to do it, and we want to try and do it faster, but we never want to be the first. And that creates a lot of challenges for startups because so often when we bring our startups to our partners, they're like, do you have a pilot partner yet? Because we don't want to be the first pilot partner, right? Um, and so if you look across all these different Asia ecosystems, there is a fair amount for any founder to try and navigate. Um, there are such different attitudes towards innovation, startup ecosystems, and so on and so forth. I would say it's better today than it was 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, but it's still a rather fragmented ecosystem as a whole that any founder needs to try and navigate. And the fact that Asians are very risk averse or they are often very hesitant to try, it doesn't make it easier in any sense for the founders.
Does that somehow tie into why there aren't as many exits that you see in India? Not India, I'm saying Asia as compared to the West.
Yeah, I think I have friends who really got exits on paper. They're like within 2 years they get exits. They sketch out ideas. They raise their funding before they've even written a single line of code, and then they get an exit like maybe a couple months later. I've heard a lot of such stories, right? And I also know a couple of people that have gone through that process. I don't think you're gonna ever see that in Asia. Asians are very practical people. I think one of the big challenges also is that when we look at a lot of the technologies that are very deep tech focused, it's hard to find them customers. Often we try and bring our deep tech companies to the West because they're a lot more willing to embrace. Whereas Asia audience will ask, do you have customers yet? Doesn't matter that it's sophisticated technology, doesn't matter that it's very novel technology that's worth celebrating. Do you have customers yet? Have you made revenue? How many customers do you have? That's always the bottom line, questions that the Asia audience wants to know. And as compared to Western audiences that are like, hey, that's really interesting technology. Where can we use it? Let's be a little bit more open-minded about how we can use this technology. So you can see, fundamentally the questions that's being asked is very different. And so if you are trying to build deep tech in Asia and you are first, you're going to struggle a fair bit because you're trying to introduce something into a very old-fashioned and traditional ecosystem, and you're hoping that it sticks, right? We always like to say that if you're Asian company, it's better that you have succeeded in the West and then you come back and you'll be celebrated as compared to building it in Asia and then trying to succeed only in Asia, right? So fundamentally, we know that there are flaws. The Asia ecosystem is not like a perfect ecosystem. But as a founder, how do you navigate that and how do you make sure you succeed here, knowing all of these things and then using that to your advantage?
Just a quick little break from the episode to say that if you've enjoyed this conversation so far, then please like and subscribe. I believe in first providing value and then asking for your subscription. And so if you feel like you've learned something and you have enjoyed this conversation, then subscribing genuinely helps. It helps me to continue bringing on incredible guests and creating more conversations like this. Now back to the episode. Let's look at the lessons you have learned from talking to so many aspiring founders. What are those common traits that you've seen in those people that have succeeded and crucially those people who haven't succeeded, at least on their first try?
Founders that have exceeded on their first try. So I think at the earliest stages, and you talk to a lot of investors that do, seed funding, and they're investing in early stage. Often, the biggest criteria is that they're investing in a team. And so for me, the way that I look at team is, how coachable is this person, or this group of founders? How much hustle do they have, right? Do they work very hard to try and make things work? Um, and how likable are they as people? So the founders that I've seen, and I've worked with founders as young as like 15 years old, they the ones that will stand out, they really stand out. And I remember this group of founders that I work with where we really liked them because I would have check-ins with them every week, and we'll talk about what needs to be worked on. Um, we'll talk about like what are the barriers that the challenges that they're going through, and I'll tell them, hey, this is what you should try and work on this week. And the amazing thing is every week, after our check-in, within 1 or 2 days, they'll come back and say, hey, Joyce, we took your comments, we took that feedback, and we've done something about it. You said we didn't talk enough to users, so we went out and talked to 30 users today, and this is the insights that we've gotten, and this is what we've actually been able to do with that information. And so the founders that are receptive to feedback and act on the feedback, and do something about it, they are the ones that will go very far because they're very coachable, they're very willing to listen, and they're willing to make changes in order to make sure that they can actually bring their company further. And over the years, I've seen, and it's very fundamental. Like all the founders that have been able to do well, they have that trait, right? Not saying that every single founder that has that trait naturally will be successful, but all the ones that have been successful, they are they kind of fall in that category. They come back to people very fast. They come back to me very fast. They tell me, I've incorporated that feedback. Even some of the founders that are in college that I'm working with today, they're like that. They come back to me and say, hey, Joyce, I could be in a meeting with them and I'll be talking and talking, and I'll see them writing a lot of things, and they tell me, hey, today I got all the information I needed. I'm going to work on it and I'll come back and let you know. And they do come back and they let me know what has changed. They tell me what they have been able to infer from this, and they tell me what their next steps are going to be. You really like founders like that. So at the earliest stages, I think those are the things that make a difference.
How do you stop founders from falling too in love with the solution rather than the problem? I know that's a very common issue that you see in a lot of founders. How do you stop that?
I talk about that a lot in my class, right? And you'll be amazed, but I can talk about it and I can ask if people understand it, right? And I will still get people that will ping me 6 months later and say, I built a prototype. What do you think about my prototype? Can you give me comments on my prototype? And I'm like, I don't care about your prototype. Have you spoken to your users, right? And they're like, no, I want to know what you think about my prototype first. But I'm not your user. And the fact that you've not spoken to a single person when you built this prototype means you've not taken that lesson in at all, right? Then you're still fixated on the idea that if you build a beautiful prototype, people will come and users will use your product. I think often it's that the smart ones, they understand that concept, and they understand that it's not so much about the product, but it's about the users, right? And it's building something users want. And it's about talking to your users and figuring out, in inferring what is the feedback or comments that they're trying to give to you. And the ones that don't get it, they kind of have to go through that process and fail and realize, oh, that's a wrong way to do things before they kind of absorb that information. And so if you send me a prototype, I will not give you a single comment on your prototype. I will tell you, go and talk to your users first. And there are people that until today, I still have a ton of people who will reach out to me and say, hey Joyce, I built my product. What do you think about my prototype? What do you think about, this product that I've built? Yeah, I spent the last 3 weeks vibe coding something. What do you think? I'll not give them a single line of comment because I don't care about the prototype, right? I care about, have you spoken to your users and what did they say about your prototype and whether it solves their problem? And that's what I want to hear. That's a lot more important. So that's how I tell them. If you don't have a single user that you've spoken to, don't come to me with your prototype because I wouldn't give you a single comment on your prototype.
I think you said one of the most important things for any aspiring founder. You need to validate the problem first. And first of all, and I'll understand what those users really want. How do you think about finding co-founders? Crucially, say like I want to found something, which is the case. What do I look for in a co-founder? How do I know that I've found that person?
It's like a perennial problem. I think so many companies have taken a step at that, right? At trying to do co-founder matching. I think varying levels of success, and it really boils down to individual. The way that I've met my other co-founders over the years, is that we were friends. I met them at events. I've worked with them over the years. I worked with people that, we kind of gel together. A very important thing is expanding the network. Because the bigger your network of people that you know, the more possible co-founders you could find within that pool. And so you can imagine for someone that, does not go out there and they are limited to friends and family, their potential co-founders that they can find within that network is very small, right? What I did in my earlier years is because I was working in a prior to being in the tech and startup space, is that um I was working in a little bit more of a mid-end operations role. I wouldn't say that I had a very big network. And I kind of realized very early that, hey, if I want to build something today, I can only ask my friends and family, all of which had no interest, zero. And so for me, it was like, okay, I have to expand the pool of people that I'm meeting, so that at some point in time, if I hit it off with the right person, we can build something together. So I spend a lot of time going to startup and tech events every single day, for 2 years, to just meet people and just get to know people. And I would reach out to people and talk to them and say, hey, let's grab coffee so that, I can build up that network of people over time. And in that 2 years, I got a huge amount of opportunities, from people that were like, hey, I'm interested in to build something. Do you want to build together? Or it was like, hey, you're very active within the ecosystem space. Do you want to come and help me do this or work with me on this? And it was just taking these opportunities to just continuously expand the network. When you think about co-founders and people say, I've been best friends with this guy forever, we're like, best mates since we were 5. Doesn't necessarily mean your best mate will be the best co-founder you can work with. I think I've worked with friends and family as co-founders, right? They are there because they want to support me, not because they're invested in being a co-founder or having any interest whatsoever in the product or the company, right? So it's very important that you find people with the same level of commitment and enthusiasm and determination to make things work. I think those are very important things. A lot of people talk about complementary skill sets, but I would say at the end of the day, as a founder, you can't focus on one area. And so whatever other areas you're not competent at, you or your co-founders need to figure that out. So skill sets, I think, is something that can be learned. I have seen co-founders that are non-technical go learn, how to program so that they can build their product, right? I've also seen technical co-founders step out from a technical role because someone needs to sell, and someone needs to fundraise, right? And they learn this kind of skills along the way. So skill sets, I think it's good if you find people that have complementary skill sets to you. But really important thing is that as co-founders, you must have the same level of commitment, enthusiasm, and determination to make things work. A lot of people say, "Yeah, I'm just going to bring in my friend. He has other focuses and other projects that he's doing, so he's just going to do it part time." Never works. It fizzles out in like 1 to 2 months, right? So if this other person that you're bringing in as a other prospective co-founder has so many other interests and so many other projects that they are focused on, this is never going to be their baby. So it's never going to work, right? This partnership. So it's very important that you find someone that is just as committed to this, to making this work as you are. That's the kind of people that you want as co-founders.
I think another very important but rather dangerous thing to think about is pivoting. How do you, as a founder, know that you need to pivot as opposed to maybe just trying a little harder? That's a very difficult decision to make, I'd assume.
Yeah, I've had founders ask me this so often. Um, and I think one of the founders that and they were somewhat, I think, um, famous. They had done some campaigns that put them in the public eye, so they were relatively well known. But they weren't generating the kind of revenue. And it was a little bit of a dilemma, right? Because here you have a little bit of visibility within the public space. People know the brand, people know who you are. They don't know that you're not generating enough revenue to sustain. Um, and founder has been doing this for, I think at a time was maybe about around 5 years. And at that point, it's like, well, we're still not paying ourselves. We're still not getting the kind of revenue that we think we should be getting at that stage. So for me, it's always I always like to think of it as a 24-month cycle. You map out, where you think you should be in 24 months. And so on a company level, if you're not there in 24 months, something is very wrong. And then you got to figure out, what you need to be doing. But when you think of a startup, they might not last 24 months. So you have to kind of scale that all down, right? So if you're very early stage, every single experiment that you run, you need to think what is the amount of time that this experiment is going to run for, and what is the stop loss for yourself. So if you're going to run this campaign, and we're going to run this campaign for 3 months, and if 3 months in we're not seeing the results, we have to cut it and we have to move on to something else, right? So every single next step that you're going to build, every single feature, campaign, activation, whatsoever that you're going to do, you must always figure out when is the stop loss. It's the same with some of my startups that are working with their corporate partners for pilots or POCs. They're like, we're not getting a deal from them, but still they're asking for more things and so on and so on. Like, at what point do we stop? And I was like, well, if you've been working with them for, let's say, 18 months, 24 months, and you still don't see a deal on the table, don't waste time with them anymore. Move on to the next fish, right? So I think there's no one singular duration, because it's really subjective to what you're looking at. But you must think, okay, before I start this step, what is that period of time that tells me if I don't hit this particular milestone, I should move on to something else, right? So for me, I cut things very quickly because I'm a startup. I don't have all the time in the world to spend and wait and hope things improve. So if something is not working, I better pivot as fast as I can, right? And the signs will usually be there. It's never a time where things are beautiful for like, the first month, and then things drop in the next week. The signs will usually be there. It's that you're struggling all the way, and you tell yourself 3 months in, we don't do something about it. We should figure the next step, right? So I wouldn't say there's a perfect formula to this, but it's that whatever you're going to start on, you should think about what is that particular milestone that you need to hit, and how many months you need to hit it by. And if you don't, then that's the time that you need to do something about it.
I think with this, AI is, a very natural segue. And I think when we talk about AI and startups and building and deep tech and so on, I think people often restrict the conversation to prototyping. Yes, we get it. With vibe coding, you can create a prototype. I want to know, how do you think about AI solving the fundamental problem, which is what we talked about, validating demand, talking to customers? Where does AI fit into that conversation?
AI is a good teacher. That's what I say. Because the decks that I'm seeing nowadays, they are so well constructed. And what has happened is that um, I have teams that I work with where they have not gone through their own decks. They have prompted ChatGPT, Claude, or whatever platforms you're using to create a deck, to create your SWOT analysis. They created your roadmap and so on and so forth. A lot of people, a lot of founders, prospective founders that I'm speaking to, they don't understand their content enough. AI really comes in handy and can be a huge lever only when you know and understand enough about what you're trying to work on. And then that helps you with refining the thinking. But if you are using AI for the thinking, that's where it doesn't work. And so the ones that are really having that edge is the founders that have put in the legwork, the research work, the validation work to go and think about it first. If they have done the critical thinking component first, and then they use AI to enhance all of these things, that's where it really makes a difference. And it's a very big telltale sign because I have these founders pitching to me, and they're not familiar enough with the content on because AI makes it look so beautiful, right? So I receive the slides, I'm thinking, this looks gorgeous, data looks nice, whatever. But when you question the founder, they're like, they can't produce the evidence for why these numbers are on the deck. They don't understand the subject matter enough, right? Anybody can come up with a good tech nowadays with AI, but how well, you know, or how much depth do you know about that particular topic, why it's a problem worth solving, so on and so forth. That makes it so. The irony is that the non-AI part is the thing that makes a difference. So if you are, I think you have put in enough of the thought process into that, then you use AI to refine it. That's where it really changes things. But if you use AI to do the thinking for you, chances are it's not going to work out.
We're down to our last few questions, and these are questions that I couldn't fit anywhere in the sequence, so that they're miscellaneous, but I think they're important to talk about. I know one category of founders that you work with are sustainability angle founders. Can you tell me some things that stand out amongst those people and crucially their companies that succeed?
I wouldn't say that there's a big difference between founders in the sustainability space versus founders that are not in the sustainability space. But of course, they are trying to often sell to um, people that care about impact and care about sustainability. And and therein lies the difference in the way that they pitch to these people. Because these people don't care about dollars and cents as much. They still care. But they also want to know what is the impact that you can create, right? I think we did a session with our founders a couple of years ago where we talked about crafting a sustainability narrative. Um, and we had this lady who is, this the chief sustainability officer of a large organization come in, and she talked about the fact that, it's not so much about like, oh, how much carbon have I removed, right? Or, how much informal workers have we been able to support and so on. But really at the end of the day is that in your practice, in the way that you build your entire workplace and so on and so forth, what are the sustainable practices that you have inculcated to show us that that is top of mind? Because when a company that cares about sustainability looks for partners to work with, that's a very key thing for them. So it's not just that the product is sustainable, right? Or that the product solves a sustainable problem, but it's that it's inculcated within the company's culture. It's a part of the way that they run the company and so on and so forth. Um, that's what matters a lot to them as well. But when you're a startup, it's hard to have all of these things in place. It's not like as a startup, I am going to be thinking about how to have sustainable practices. I am maybe a 3 people company as a three-person company, what are the sustainable practices that I can put in place, right? So as a startup, often that's that, I would say, very gray area to how they can look at these kind of sustainable practices. But I've seen startups that, for example, talk about how with every dollar that they generate or every $1,000 that they generate, this is what they're going to put back to make sure that they're going to create a more sustainable practice. So it's in the little things, right? Or that they are mindful about the kind of partners that they work with. And they build businesses with people that are, in the that care maybe about impact and environment. So it's in the little things. There is no perfect playbook for this. I've worked with so many foundations and impact companies, impact funds, and so on. And we've looked a lot at this. There is no perfect playbook for a sustainability startup. At the end of the day, a startup is still a startup, whether or not you are sustainable or not, right? It just matters that you when you talk to companies that care about impact, care about sustainability, you are able to show them that as a company, you are thinking about these things, or you have put some of these things in place. And that's why, they are able to build a narrative that really makes sense to the companies that they want to work with.
Another thing I came across during my research is this idea that investors are now focusing on a lot more stable growth as opposed to hyper growth. What is the reasoning behind that?
We work. I think in the past it's growth at all costs, right? And I think the WeWork crash kind of contributed to that. I think it's a series of events, but everyone kind of attributes it to WeWork as an example. I think a very important thing is that has been the model for so many years. Take the money from the investors, put it all into making sure you get a double, triple, 10 digit, but not 10 digit, like double digit growth and so on, 10x growth and so on. So before that, it's that the investors want you to take their money and make sure you can scale so much faster, right? But I think a lot of that happened in the last 10 years. And obviously, COVID was not a great time. There's been quite a bit of um, economic instability throughout all the different regions in the world and so on. So you're building in a very different time and space, right? And a lot of investors also don't have as much capital that they can deploy, right? And so they are a lot more choosy with the kind of companies that they want to invest in. And they have to make sure that these companies they're investing in is no longer a spray and pre method, right? So I'm not going to invest small checks in 1,000 companies and hope a handful will survive, right? Is that every investment and every bet I'm making, the chance of success must be there. So investors' appetites have changed. The operating environment and global environment has changed, and they're no longer putting that kind of a pressure on startups. And at the same time, startups are realizing there's not enough capital in the market. So you can't just think, I want to be a venture-backed company, and then you start a company and then you try and raise funding. We advise a lot of our early stage founders now to think about how you can be profitable as early as possible. And so making sure that in order to be profitable is that you have to be very salient around how you spend money, how you use money, to manage your operations and so on, right? And so it becomes a time where I think someone coined the concept calm company, CALM, right? So you have to build in a more calm manner where you're more profitable, you're more sustainable. You're not gonna perish just because you weren't able to raise your next round of funding, right? And that's really the entire idea around why the entire funding environment and startup environment has changed drastically in the last, I would say, 6 years. It's really the idea that you have to adapt to a very different kind of environment today if you're building a startup company.
Wow. So there's so much to even take from there, but I'll keep this to the last two questions. Is there something that you have learned or rather thought at the beginning of this journey that you now realize was wrong? Some earlier assumption that you had when you started working with startups that you now realize was wrong?
I think I maybe underestimated the amount of mental support that founders need. And I'm a very practical person. So I often think, okay, if things don't work out, you cry over it, you be upset over it, let's move on. But I think I kind of very severely underestimate the impact it has on people and founders. We're not born with the understanding of how to be a founder. We're not born to learn how to run companies. We're not born with the knowledge of how to handle investors and your audience, your customers, and so on. So we learn that along the way. I think a lot of founders they're constantly in learning mode and firefighting mode, and it puts you on edge. And so I think very early on, when we're working with very early stage founders, we just think it's good fun. Everyone's building together, everyone's trying hard together, and so on. But over the years, I've seen the mental toll it takes on founders. I have seen founders that have been so burned out. I've seen founders that have gone bankrupt because they, put up so much of their own capital in order to start their company. I have seen very macho founders break down because they are so stressed out about their company, they can't spend time with their newborn baby. So I've seen a lot of that. I think I've sorely underestimated the mental toll. And so I think a very important thing when we think about supporting our founders today is how do we provide that kind of mental support and emotional support to our founders? It's not something that a lot of people talk about because you can imagine a lot of Asians, we tend to hide that vulnerable self, right? But when you see grown men cry, you understand that it affects everybody, right? And so often I think I try to be a good listening ear, and I think we also try to spot these kind of things early, right? So it's about checking in with the founders that you're working with. It's about making sure that, hey, I have founders that come to me and tell me I'm stressed out about this. Okay, what can we do about it? I had founders that have gone through health scares, right? And still worried about not being able to raise their next round of funding. So how can you support that? It's very case by case basis because it's not something that you can apply to everybody, right? It's not a case where we run a mental wellness class and everybody, instantly gets better. It doesn't work that way, right? It's very case by case. Sometimes it's almost like you're a agony aunt to the founders that you work with. But it's not something that I think I would have placed a lot of attention or focus on in the early years. But as I start to work with more and more founders that have gone through, severe breakdowns, I understand now that, it has to be a very important part of the journey. To think about how you can take care of your founders and how they can build a good support network as early as possible.
I think that's a pain point that needs to be solved. I don't know if it's a startup idea, but it certainly is a business idea. But and I say this
Yeah.
with all seriousness, this idea of having therapy dedicated for founders. I have a closing tradition on this podcast. This one question that I ask everyone. If you had access to billboards across the world for just one day, what is the message that you would put up there?
I would put my WhatsApp QR code there.
Let's go. Let's go. That is one of the best answers I've heard. Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. Oh, people will be curious. People will scan. It gives me access, to anyone and everyone in the world. Not saying that it's necessarily a good thing to do because it also invites a lot of random stuff. Um, but I think, being able to build an audience is a very powerful thing. And it's not even something that I work on enough, to be honest. But when you have an audience, you command attention. And a lot of people think, oh, it's easy to build an audience. It's not easy to build an audience, and it's even harder to maintain and engage, keep your audience engaged, right? So let's use that for the hard work first of building that audience, right? So
Awesome.
open up that access, and then once you have audience, the reason why a lot of celebrities can sell things that are not related to them in any ways because they have an audience, right? So let's
You
start
know,
with
I think the
yeah.
Rock, like Dwayne Johnson sells shampoo and he doesn't have any hair to shampoo, but
Yeah,
it's because of the power of his audience.
precisely, right? You don't know it's not about The Rock having hair. It's the fact that his audience has hair, right? So you can sell anything to anyone. The other day, I was just sharing with one of these other folks that I work with. And I was sharing about a AI platform, and I was saying, "Hey, this is pretty good. I use this for some things." And the next day, he told me, "Hey, I subscribed to it. That's a $200 subscription." I was like, "I didn't well, like why?" Because I'm on a free plan. And he said, "Well, I'm taking it, because you recommended it, and I trust that you gave me a good recommendation, so I went to subscribe to it the same night." I was like, "Oh, okay, so I have influence, right? Um, because I'm in the space and I talk about a product that I like, people take my word for it, right? So that's the power that you have, right? It doesn't matter that I'm not the paid user myself. I've converted someone to become a paid user purely because I think the platform is awesome. And so if you think about that, right? Um, Dwayne Johnson doesn't need to have hair. He just needs to think that the shampoo is pretty good. I trust the people building it. I like the chemicals. I like the natural ingredients that's in it. He can sell shampoo to a lot of people that have hair. So that's really the idea behind it.
That's a wonderful place to end on. Thank you so much, Joyce.
Thank you, Ishan. Thank you. I really enjoyed this podcast.
Thank you so much for listening. Before you go, I have 3 small requests to ask you. If you enjoy listening to the episode, then please subscribe. Second, please share this with someone who you think will find it valuable. You see, a lot of effort and time goes into creating these podcasts. And so by sharing it, you'll help me reach new audiences, and that'll help keep the show alive. Third, please tell me your thoughts. You can reach out to me on social media, on email, and so on, and tell me what you enjoyed, what you didn't like, and new guests and episodes that you'd like to have discussed on the podcast. Again, thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next episode.